What's up, Dads? Your boy Big Dave back with another episode of Culture Dad's Age of Sword and Cassette. So today we're going to talk about something that Mike. This was Mike's suggestion, and Mike always has great suggestions. And this suggestion might be one, at least in recent memory, this is one of my favorite of Mike's recent suggestions. So he suggested that we do a show talking about storytelling and folklore and stuff like that. And in that, he gave me a few episodes from the series that I was a bit unaware of. And the series was called Jim Henson's The Storyteller, right? Obviously, we're all aware of Jim Henson. Jim Henson is, he did the Muppets. He did the special effects in Star Wars. He was the voice of Yoda. He's Jim Henson. He's the man, right? I didn't know he did this show. I'm not surprised because he did a lot of different shows, but in different projects and stuff like that. But I never heard of this. This kind of slipped under my radar, which is kind of weird because I grew up in around the time that these types of shows were on the air. This was something, and maybe I did see it, and I just don't remember it. But Mike gave me 3 episodes of the show to watch, and I just loved it. I thought it was fantastic. But we're gonna talk about it in a minute. But what's going on, Mr. Mike? How we doing?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty well, Dave. It's getting colder for you guys up in the northern hemisphere, but down under here, we're going in the opposite direction. It's getting super hot. It was 41 degrees today, so I was sweating my balls off. And I had something. I had a friend's kid's birthday come up today, so I had to kind of cram to prep for this episode, but I think it's going to be a good one. This series really looms large in my consciousness, like as a child. And I rediscovered it, many years ago now, but when I did, it was kind of like unlocking a door. Because, when you watch shows when you're pretty young, and it has this, especially a show like this that has so much mythopoetic quality to it, that it just kind of like there's images and things in the stories that just imprint themselves on your mind. So it's very hard to forget that stuff. It's just always kind of there in the background. So that's definitely the way it was with this show for me. And, many years later, having pretty much completely forgot it, I still remembered, the look of some of the characters. Like, we're going to talk about Hans the Hedgehog. We're going to talk about the devils in The Soldier and Death and a few other things. But they definitely were, there was just like an image imprinted on my mind kind of thing. So, and also one of the things that's really cool about it is that it is really one of those shows where they did the practical effects really, really nicely. And you watch this show, many years later. I mean, however many years later now, it's like 35 years old or something like that. It still holds up. It still looks good to this day. A lot of those practical effects are still very effective. And so when I suggested it to you, I was really expecting you to go, "Oh, I know that show," and we would have a lot to talk about in that regard. But I was surprised to find that you'd not seen it. So this was kind of exciting for me. I know you love this era. I know you love this style. I know you love these kind of stories. And I was just like, Dave is going to love this. So it was pretty cool. Like, this episode and the last episode has been like, I'm bringing Dave into my house.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Usually, probably 2/3 of the time it's Dave sharing something cool that he's seen or watched or read with me that I missed out on. But this was the other way around. So I want to get your overall sort of take on it. Like, what did you think about the series?
I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. I thought everything about it was like you said, I love the aesthetics of this era. I love the old timey effects. I even love some of the overlays and the rotoscoping. I love the puppets and the animatronics. I love where they superimpose like the giant, the thing with the giant. I love how he was. I just thought it was great. I thought it was great. I loved the writing for the dialogue of the storyteller himself. It was very, very, I guess you could say, it reminded me of like Brothers Grimm or even early Tolkien, like from The Hobbit, right? And it had that vibe. It was fantastic. I loved it. I thought the stories in it were great because they weren't kind of these modern interpretations of fairy tales or folklore. They were I don't know if these were actually folklore. I actually cracked open the folktales in the Indo-European tradition to see if I could find them, and I didn't see them. Maybe they're in there and I just missed it. But I don't know if these were actually real folktales. I do know that, for example, the Soldier and Death was either informed by or was an adaptation of a Russian folktale. And with this story in particular, a lot of especially the Eastern folklore are kind of grim. Not like Brothers Grimm, but grim as in grimdark. Like they have there's some happy stuff in it. There's also usually some sort of pretty bad ending, right? It'll be like the Eastern European and even some of the old German stuff. That's what I like about the old stuff, is it doesn't hold back. I think ancient people understood that children weren't these like little cherubs that you couldn't bruise or anything. They were, they understand the world better than we give them credit for. And they gave them these stories that teach them things that are very real about real life, things with death and betrayal and heartbreak and all this kind of stuff. Right. And I know I've read some Russian folk tales that they get pretty grim. It'll be like,
they're pretty dark.
Yeah. It'll be like, Natalia eat too many cookie. Now Natalia is prostitutes. Like that's not.
Yeah, man, that's totally. I mean, I've been watching this series now for a couple of weeks, and this is part of why I suggested it to you. Let's do it, because it's kind of like, strike while the iron's hot. It's fresh in my mind. I've been watching it with my kids, and yeah, I mean, there's 9 episodes that I think there's only 9, but we've watched all of them, and a few of them we've watched like a dozen times. You know what I mean? Because how it is with kids, when they like something, they like one particular episode or one show or like one story or one book or whatever. It's like they just have to have that over and over and over and over again. And there's for my kids, it's actually 2 of the ones we watched. It's Hans my Hedgehog and The Soldier and Death. And I could tell you, I have never received a machine gun battery of questions from my youngest like I have about The Soldier and Death. There's so many questions coming out of that story from a little kid's perspective. But yeah, you're right. It's like, this is one of the things I really love about folklore. I really don't think it's for children per se, but it certainly, it doesn't exclude them. These are the kind of stories that would have been told to adults for many, 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 many generations, and we'll go into how old they are. But yes, it definitely doesn't hold back, and it doesn't sugarcoat them for children, and that's part of what I love about it. And we're maybe getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but this is one of the things about heathenry and paganism in general, is that it's not afraid to look at the darkness that sort of like underlies the world. And this is something that really comes through in folklore. And of course, folklore and myth and legend and all these things, they're actually kind of hard to disentangle. So probably we should go into that. First of all, for guys that are new to Imperium Press and guys that are new to Kulture Dads, Imperium, we published a book a couple of years ago now called Folktales in the Indo-European Tradition. And it's a very thick book. It's part of our Western Canon series. This is one of the ones that guys order a lot for the hardcovers because it is a very, very good piece of work, if I do say so myself. What it is it is a collection of 150 folk tales that were organized according to a study that was published several years ago now that basically used what are called phylogenetic analyses, so phylogenetic techniques that are basically like the same kind of techniques that are used in genomics and biology to trace back like how ancient certain things are in the in DNA and in archaeology and in culture and linguistics and things like that. These are like one of the ways that we can tell how old certain words are with etymologies and everything like that is by these techniques. So they applied this set of techniques to folk tales, and they found that these folk tales were astoundingly old because starting in the 60s, I mean, so many things happened around that particular time, the 1960s, where lots of things started coming into question. I mean, we all know the story, right? But one of the things that came into question is how old folktales really were. Because in the 19th century, when folkloristics really kind of got going in earnest, it was quite clear to people like the Brothers Grimm and others that folktales were extremely old. But in the 1960s, it started to come into question, and it became kind of fashionable to say, well, they're not really that old. They're only, probably only a few centuries old, and they're, written by like one particular person. And it just kind of got, like a game of telephone. It started getting passed around and changed and everything like that. But they're not really that old. And really what this was is a kind of like post hoc rationalization for being able, permitting themselves to overwrite folk culture, basically, with modern culture and its centralized power and all that nonsense. So this became a kind of an academic trend. And, this was a viable thesis for many generations, or at least, many decades, until this study was published just a few years ago by two academics by the name of Silva and Terrani. And what it basically determined with complete certainty, basically, is that folk tales, many of what are called fairy tales or, magical tales, wonder tales, many folk tales are extremely old, not just centuries old, but millennia old. Some of them actually go back as far as the Proto-Indo-Europeans. We can trace certain well-known fairy tales back that far. Now, this was quite an astounding find, and it even made front-page news, like in The Guardian. The Guardian newspaper ran like a big story about this, and this is where I caught hold of it. And at the time, as Imperium was kind of starting to wind up, like we were about to start it, I was putting together a little collection of folk tales for my kids, one of whom was about to be born. So I thought, here's a nice little gift from Dad, like a little family heirloom. And was putting together some, wholesome folk tales and, things that impart good lessons and are really cool and stuff. Like thinking back to things like The Storyteller, how much I loved that when I was a kid. So I thought, I'll put something together. And then I got hold of this study and I thought to myself, wow, that is really something. I cannot believe how old these folktales are. Wouldn't it be cool if I put in the oldest ones? So I got the study and I looked at which folktales were came out of which Indo-European migrations. And I started looking for examples or instances of these really ancient tale types, and I found them and I started putting them together, and I thought to myself, wouldn't it be cool if you had more than one of the same tale, right? Because here's the thing, these different folk tales, you will kind of get the same tale in different countries. It's got like some variations to it, but it's the same tale basically. Wouldn't it be cool if you took these same tales and you put them side by side? You could compare and contrast them, and we can get an idea of what the original might have been like, kind of thing. So it just kind of, it was one of these things. Dave will understand this 100%. You start out with an idea and you think, okay, that's the idea. And then it takes on a life of its own and it gets out of control. And you're just like, it starts to kind of take over your life. And then I'm spending hundreds and hundreds of hours on this thing. And eventually it's through a large number of convolutions ended up becoming this book, Folktales in the Indo-European Tradition. Which I wrote the foreword for as well, where I basically explain in much more detail and with many more examples, basically what I just explained. And I connect it to Proto-Indo-European reconstruction. So the reconstruction of the folkways, the rituals, the beliefs, the myths, the stories of the people who lived 6,000 years ago that became basically all of the branches of the Europeans and the Indians and the Iranians and all of that. So that is basically the story of that book. And so folklore is really at the heart of, Imperium Press itself, as well as so many other things. So one of the things that I discovered it's key to this particular study that I mentioned is that folktales can be organized into what are called tale types. So back in the 19th century, when the Grimm brothers were collecting stories, when they were, that's a whole story in itself about the Grimm brothers, but they were basically the first ones to really do this as a scientific enterprise. And as they were doing it and collecting all these tales and everything like that, they noticed that, as I mentioned, the same basic story would be told in different countries. So, you'd get a Cinderella in France, but you'd also get one in Germany, and then you get one in Russia, and there would be like a Little Red Riding Hood from Norway, and one from England, and one from Lithuania, and so on and so forth. So you just have the same story kind of across different branches of the European family. They noticed this, but that was not really, something that they pursued. In the early 20th century, folklore experts, folklorists, started cataloging these things in earnest, and this yielded what was called ATU tale types. So this is ATU just stands for the names of the guys who were doing this: Arnie, Thompson, and Uther. And what the tale type is it's the basic kind of germ of a story. It's not quite a story. It's kind of it's a framework or a skeleton of a story. So an example of an ATU tale type would be Godfather Death. So here's an example. Each of the tale types has a number. Godfather Death is 332. And in Godfather Death, what happens typically, because again, there are variations, is a poor man will be searching for a godfather for his child, and for whatever reason, he will choose death as opposed to, God or a wealthy man or something. And in exchange for this, as a thank you, death will give the power to this man of seeing himself either standing at the head or the foot of a bed when someone is sick or perhaps about to die. And so because the man can now predict whether someone's going to get well or is going to die, he becomes a famous doctor, basically. And at some point in the tale type, he tricks death, whether by turning the bed around or by playing some other sort of ruse to forestall the death or whatever. And death then gets revenge on him for that. Usually in the tale, what'll happen is death will take the man to the underworld to see all the souls that are these candles that are lit in like this giant sort of cavern or whatever, and then death will put out the man's own light. There's not any one tale that really answers to that specific what I've just laid out there, but that's kind of what happens on average, you could say, right? This is what an ATU tale type is. And there are tons and tons of variation that can be put onto these tales. We're going to talk about one such variation in one of the episodes in this the series. But there's lots of flexibility, and very often what you'll see with these folk tales is a kind of composite story gets put together. You kind of have, more than one of these tale types kind of get braided together into this like narrative that just makes sense or whatever, with other elements that come in, maybe something that's original or whatever at some point. But the important takeaway from all of this is that we have these tale types. This is it's very clear that different European countries had the same stories, but it's also clear, based on this study that I've just mentioned, that the tales themselves are so old that they realistically cannot have been borrowed from each other. They came from a common ancestor. And in some cases, the common ancestor is very, very old. So folk tales themselves, I mean, the upshot of the study and everything that I'm talking about here is that folk tales are extremely ancient. In some cases, they actually predate our recensions or our writing down records of myths themselves. And it's very hard to disentangle myth with folklore, because very often you will get folklore elements that crop up in myth. So it's, this is one of those things that in starting something very small, like trying to put together a little folktale collection for my kids, it basically ended up informing my whole worldview about, how myth works, how ancient all of our stories really are, and how faithful and conservative that folk culture can really, really be. And it is incredibly conservative. So, yeah, I just wanted to kind of say that at the outset.
Yeah, that's it's fascinating. I love the book. Folktales and Indo-European Tradition. It's one that I read to my kids a lot. They are still hung up on Jack and the Beanstalk. We got to do Jack and the Beanstalk before we go to the other ones. That's still their favorite. They really get into it. They love it. When I read them, I like to apply voices to it. Like when I do the giant, I give them like a fee fi fo fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman, and they're like they get all excited about it.
Oh, they love it. Yeah,
they love it. They love it. So, storytelling as a whole, I think, is such an important. And obviously, it's such an important part. And I've always thought that the idea that everything is just a game of telephone and eventually it gets so corrupted that it's not even a thing anymore, blah, blah, blah. I've always thought that was kind of fugazi, right? Even just like growing up, listening to folklore or fairy tales or whatever, you can tell that you can just feel that there's a strain in it that is immortal, right? There's something in that tale that, like, I don't know how to describe it. It just, there's a reason that it echoes, right? There's a reason that you're like, there's a truth in there. There's something special in this. You know what I mean? And before I read Indo-Europe, actually, speaking of, I never really even considered folklore to be like a legitimate thing, actually, until I had a job. I worked at a job for, I don't know, 5-6 months. I was a stock guy at a grocery store, and there's a grocery store that, it was a pretty old grocery store that I worked at. And the guy that I worked with, the way that this store worked was, it wasn't very big, but they would have, they would split it up into sections, and they would have like 2 guys on each section, and you would control a whole bunch of aisles, and you were in charge of those aisles. And then, I don't know, they didn't do overnight per se, but you would come in about, like 3-4 o'clock, and you would work till almost midnight stocking. So the guy that I worked with was actually this like special guy. He was, I don't want to call him retarded, but he had Down syndrome, right? And this guy's name was Oliver, and Oliver, he's like in his 40s. He was definitely a Down syndrome, but he was one of those, what are they called? Like a retard savants, right? first of all, this guy worked at this place. He applied when it opened, and he's been like their best employee for like 20 years or something like that. He like knew everything, where everything went in every aisle. He never missed a single day. He was, he got letters from like the regional upper management, giving him raises. He was just like the man there, right? So I worked with this special guy named Oliver. He didn't really talk a whole lot unless you asked him about one of his areas of interest, which one of them was the Spice Girls, which was pretty weird. Pretty weird. This was weird with the Spice Girls, because at this time, I guess this was like 2000s, right? Spice Girls are already way out of popularity. Like they were old at that point. They were old at that point. He had this delusion that he was like, they were like his girlfriends. He had, so he would carry this. He had this, like, it wasn't a backpack. It was not a man purse. It was like a repurposed laptop carrier, like pack or backpack or whatever, side fucking John. And this was like a little filing system that he would keep letters in that he sent to the Spice Girls. And he would get these like generic letters back, and he interpreted them as like they had a relationship. It was pretty fucking, and he would talk about, I can't remember their names, fucking Silly Spice or whatever. I was fucking with Silly Spice, and then and he would just like talk. He knew everything about them. He knew fucking, their parents. All the deep lore about the Spice Girls. If you even like engage him on Spice Girls, you were getting ready to, like, for an hour, hear every deep lore detail about Spice Girls with this guy. Another thing this guy was into was fairy tales. This was this guy's religion. It was like literally his religion was fairy tales. I'm like, I don't know how old I was, 19, 20 or something. I didn't even consider fairy tales were anything other than fairy tales. You know what I mean? This guy knew so damn much about fairy tales. He would, I don't think he quite understood it, but he would listen to these like academic discussions about fairy tales and how old they are and the Brothers Grimm and all this kind of stuff. And I don't know if he truly like understood it, but he definitely memorized it. He would recite word for word about these. So I'm listening to this guy like a fucking podcast while we're working, this fucking retard. And he just like knew goddamn everything. He was so adamant about this. He showed me the letters that he was so adamant about the authenticity of fairy tales that he sent these like 10-page fucking screeds to Disney about their movies, like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. He showed me, and obviously they were written by a retard, so it's like they couldn't, it was like one big text wall, tons of typos and misspellings, but he laid out exactly everything that they had wrong with it. It's not authentic. They should be ashamed of themselves. Shame on you. He sent these letters to Disney. Like, I'm not kidding. He wrote up 10 pages. Fucking this Down syndrome guy typed up and it was on a typewriter too. It wasn't on a computer. He had some sort of typewriter. These 10-page fucking I guess critique dissertations. You know what I mean? About these fucking things. And he told me all about it and everything. And that's what he was about. So this guy, who's actually literally a special guy, was like, talk my ear off about fairy tales. And I started thinking, maybe these things there is something more to it than that. Well, I didn't, Oliver, unfortunately, this is actually pretty sad. So I stopped working with Oliver because I snuck out for a smoke break a couple times, and I ate like a bag of something that was damaged, and he snitched on me. The whole time we were working together, he was snitching on me for everything I was doing wrong. And I was like, the manager pulled me in. He's like, yo, I heard you. He's like, I don't care. It's damaged, whatever. You shouldn't be. I was like, how the fuck do you know that? He's like, no, we don't have cameras. Oliver told us. I was like, you ought to fuck Oliver. So I stopped working with Oliver because he was a snitch. But what was pretty sad was Oliver later got fired because some like little kid was stealing and Oliver spanked him. Oh. Oliver spanked a random kid that was stealing. So he got fired. Taught him a lesson. kind of sad. It's kind of sad.
It's also kind of based.
It's definitely based. And apparently the mom like came in. She was like, yo, how dare you let that fucking retard touch my kid? And they're like, lady, don't ever come here again. Like, he's fired, but we don't want to see you again. They were pissed because, that was their dude. He would show up every single day, never late, never anything. And he was just like he was just like a fucking, he was the man there. So he got fired for spanking this little piece of shit kid. Yeah, which he deserved it. So anyway, that's my story of how I got started looking at folk tales and everything like that. And afterwards, I found my way to Brothers Grimm, and I started reading Brothers Grimm and some of their analysis and stuff like that, and some of the, I guess, the exterior later analysis of their work. Dude, the Brothers Grimm, we kind of think of them as, they're the guys that compiled. No, these guys were legitimate academics, and they were very good ones. Oh yeah. Obviously, some of their work later on got overturned, but as a whole, the Brothers Grimm were fantastic academics and were really, really about it. So, for folks out there that might not consider folk tales or fairy tales as something that is a legitimate piece of mythopoetic art or storytelling or whatever, it's a piece of us. It really truly is a piece of us. And Brothers Grimm and like the some of the academics that Mike's talking about, Mike himself, I would actually put Mike in there. Mike himself is like now an academic that is proven to many more people how valuable these things are, because storytelling is such an important part of culture. It's an important part of our culture, and to retell and to continue the lineage of these, I guess you could say, these strains of, I don't even want to call them truth. Mike, do you know what I'm talking about? What I'm getting at with that? Maybe you have a better way of describing it.
Yeah, I mean, because they basically express something that is true, but is sort of like true outside of time, I guess, in a way. And that sort of flies in the face of a little bit of kind of what we think of as like a narrative actually like having happened and it's true or whatever. I mean, these kind of explain something on a higher level than that. But yeah, I think I fully understand what you're saying with that. And I just want to echo that the Brothers Grimm were very serious academics. We even still have, like, first of all, they were folklorists, but they were a lot more than that. They were also linguists, especially, I believe, Jacob Grimm discovered something called Grimm's Law, which is a linguistic law that still is observed, like it holds, and it's just accepted as a law that holds in linguistics today. So they're very serious academics, and believe you me, linguistics is a very complicated subject. There's a lot to it. It is anything but a soft science. And yeah, so those guys were very, very impressive, and also that folklore is, I mean, I don't want to go through basically everything that is said in the introduction to the folklore book, but basically the upshot of it is that there is no real line between folklore, legend, and myth. And I think this actually kind of triggers guys a little bit, because we are made to think, we're raised in an environment where folk culture is low and myth is high. And that is just not the case. And if I have made like an original contribution to folkloristics, I think it's in recognizing that, which I put into the introduction to the Folktales book, that there are many instances that you can find in myth that are traceable via this study that basically lays out how far back you could trace all these tale types. So you can find the tale types in various myths, and if you can find that, if you can say, okay, well, this particular tale type is to be found in the Poetic Edda. So there are three examples that I give in the Poetic Edda in the introduction that could be traced back to various tale types, and through this study, those tale types are very securely known to trace back to X, Y, and Z year BC, or there's a range or whatever, but it's definitely within that range. It's very securely located. So if you could find these tale types in the Poetic Edda, then you can say that the Poetic Edda itself, or at least that the section of the myth in the Poetic Edda, it's at least that old, and perhaps even older. So one of the things that you find in the Poetic Edda, just as an example, I won't go through them all, but one of the examples that you find is in one of the Sigurd lays, where there is so there's a tale type where basically what happens, I believe it's called the White Snake, where a hero, or like the main character of the story, has to basically kill like a white serpent, and he cuts up the white serpent and he brings it back to a witch, and the witch cooks it in a broth. But the hero of the story, he is impatient. The witch walks away, and he takes the lid off of the broth, looks into the broth, and he touches the broth, and he burns his finger, and then he puts his finger into his mouth. And when that happens, he gains the ability to understand the language of birds, which is a very, very clear parallel that comes out of maybe Fafnismal. I can't remember which one it is, but one of the ones in the Sigurd lays. And this tale type goes back to, I believe, it goes back to the Proto-Balto-Slavic migrations. So this is, now this is not to say that it's a Slavic tale. It's just that is as early as it could be traced back, and it perhaps goes back a little bit earlier. Now, that particular branch can be traced back to 750 BC. So we could say that there's a plot element in the Poetic Edda that's at least as old as 750 BC. And, TLDR, there are 3 more plot elements that are that old as well. So what this tells us is that the Poetic Edda is a quite genuine document. Now, through linguistic analysis of like meters and things like that, linguists have been able to push back the authenticity of the Edda to maybe 700 BC, at an outside maybe 700 AD, 600 AD at the very outside. What this does is it pushes it back 1,000 years earlier. So we know that this is a very genuine heathen document with very, very little in the way of contamination from the outside, right? So I think that's a valuable contribution. But this is all just to say that folklore is entangled with myth. It's really impossible to separate the two at the end of the day. And we have this idea, it comes out of certain circles within heathenry, like a lot of esotericism and things like that, that myths are high and they are for the elite, and folk culture is low and it's for the plebs. Now, I'm obviously simplifying the matter a little bit, but there is a real elitism that comes out of like certain schools of thought. But what we can tell if we examine this, and I think we really ought to do that if we want to take if we want to take these religions seriously and understand them properly, we have to understand that folklore and myth are really not separable at the end of the day. Neither is high and low culture. And in some sense, this is in kind of a microcosm for what we do here at Culture Dads, isn't it? We celebrate what is close to us. We celebrate what's ours. We don't just talk about the ancient myths. We don't just talk about like the Iliad, although we do talk about that kind of stuff. But we also talk about things like, well, last week we talked about, a modern rock music movement. We've talked about modern movies. We talk about all this stuff that is what some might see as low culture, but it's ours. And it has a lot of elements underneath it that are very, very profound. And sometimes they're just there, and they were not put there consciously, right? They just sort of like arise spontaneously as an expression of the folk soul of the director or the musician or whatever it is. Modern movies, music, and so on, this is our folk culture. And, we are here to push back against people who think it all sucks because it's not Wagner. I love Wagner as much as anybody else. He was fantastic and wonderful and everything like that. But there is also very, very profound folk culture. And of course, he was drawing on all this stuff, right? Folk culture is kind of at the bottom of romantic nationalism and everything. Go back and listen to the Romanticism episode. This kind of stuff, it is impossible to disentangle the low from the high, quote unquote. So, this is something that we cannot underline sufficiently. Is that this is the reason for the Folktales book, and it's a reason for so many of the things that we do. That what we have is good enough. It's better than good enough. It's great. It's high. It is to be celebrated. It's deep and profound. But, there's a problem that we have today. We hate what's close and familiar. We kind of have an antipathy towards home that is really not a good thing at all. It's actually probably one of the deepest problems that we have today. So I think that going back and taking a second look at things like fairy tales and taking them seriously is something that we not only should do, but we have to do if we're going to kind of get ourselves out of the malaise that we have today. So I thought it would be really cool to have a look at this, The Storyteller, because what's really cool about it is it does tell some folk tales that are quite familiar. I didn't ask Dave to watch this one, but there's a Cinderella story in there, but it doesn't tell the Cinderella story the way that Disney tells it. It tells it very much more closely to the way that the Brothers Grimm tell it. And that is something a little bit different. It's still clearly the same story, but it's got some real rough edges to it. It's got some kind of darkness to it that's not really in the Disney version. And so too with the episodes that we watched here for The Storyteller. So the episodes that Dave and I watched, one of them is the first one in the series, Hans my Hedgehog. And so quickly to summarize this, I guess we'll just kind of talk about each of the tales in turn and see where it goes. To summarize this folk tale, there's a childless couple who are trying to get a baby, and they become so desperate that they just don't care what they get. And of course, by one of those like magical sort of transformations that happens in folklore, it turns out that for that reason, they get a hedgehog for a baby, and they name it Hans. So Hans is the name of the hedgehog. Obviously, the mother is completely in love with her baby, but the farmer, the father himself, he's a farmer, kind of a rough-hewn individual guy. He's a little bit disgusted by his son, right? And he drives him out. So Hans leaves after growing up, and then he takes up residence in a palace somewhere. Somehow, it's not really explained. Sometime later, there's a king that's wandering around and is lost in the forest and finds his way to Hans's palace. So Hans the Hedgehog takes him in and treats him very well. And the king promises that the first thing that he sees when he returns to his own castle will be Hans's reward. And he thinks that, quite naturally, the first thing he's going to see is his dog. But no, actually, it turns out the first thing that runs up to him is his daughter. So the hedgehog later comes to claim his rewards, to claim the daughter. The daughter kind of reluctantly but dutifully goes off with him. And they live together for some time. And it turns out that every night, Hans the hedgehog sheds his quills. He sheds his skin and speaks to her and says, who would you choose? Would you choose the creature or the man? And she kind of she says, well, my husband is my husband, and I love him as he is, basically. And he says, if you truly love him for 3 nights, then he will turn into a man. He will shed his quills forever. And then, so she's excited about this naturally, and then speaks to her mother again later. And the mother kind of weasels it out of her that, that she knows that he sheds his skin, and the mother's found another way to get rid of the hedgehog and turn him into a man. She tells the daughter that rather than waiting, she should actually throw the skin onto the fire. So she kind of, gets tricked by her mother or whatever, and decides that she's going to do that. And it ends up burning the hedgehog. He runs off and leaves, and then she goes off and searches for him for years and years, and eventually finds him. And it turns out that like her searching for him is the true love that was required to turn him into a man. So he turns into a human, and then they go back and they all live happily ever after. This is the one out of the three folk tales that I gave to Dave that has a happy ending. It's the only one that has a happy ending, but it certainly has quite a bit of darkness to it as well, and weirdness as well. There's weirdness in there with the animatronics and the puppetry and things like that. Yeah. I love this time. I love this the way that like television was produced at this time, because there's definitely that. This is what made it stick in my mind. I could always remember like the look of the hedgehog, especially as a baby, where he looks really weird and like just ugly and stuff like that. But anyway. Before I go on more about that, Dave, tell me how that story struck you.
Oh, I thought it was great. As you mentioned, I love the costume or the puppet or whatever they use for the hedgehog. He's a little uncanny and freaky looking, right? He rides a giant rooster. There's actually quite a bit of symbolism. I didn't really have time to sit and conjure kind of a take on what the symbolism is. There's quite a bit in there that I could recognize. For example, the one that stuck out that I know means something is before she goes on her quest, after she burns the hedgehog, after she's deceived by her mother, right? Or misled by her mother, I should say. She goes to the blacksmith and says, I need to find my love, but I need 3 pairs of iron shoes. And on the third, when she dons the third pair, then she finds the hedgehog, right? And then she confesses her love, and he turns into a human, and then she gets her beauty back too.
That's right, yeah.
So her losing her beauty as well, right? I think it said the red came out of her hair. She lost her beautiful red hair. Something happened with her face. She's covered in cobwebs. I can't remember all of it that happened, but she lost her beauty in her quest for him. And then the 3 iron shoes, the number 3, obviously 369 is the numerology, the Odinic numerology. So 3 nights, or 3 pairs of iron shoes, and on the third she does it, and there's something with iron. Who knows what it is? I probably could have cooked that up, but I just I didn't have time. But there's quite a bit of symbolism in this one as well. And when she comes back, he transforms, and then she, over time, after she kind of atones for what she did and frees him from his curse, she returns her beauty. Right. This is a very old thing. And actually, this reminded me of when we did we do Crawl yet?
No,
we didn't do Crawl yet. But this reminded me of a scene in the movie Crawl where the old man wizard goes to this spider queen who has lost her beauty in her spite and her anger against her husband, or her misdeeds against her husband. She loses her beauty. And by helping him and letting go of her spite and her anger and everything, she gains her beauty back. She no longer is this hideous old spider queen. Her beauty now comes back. And this is something that happens over and over and over again. This might be a tale type of the feminine atonement is to regain one's beauty, is something that happens. We see a lot. And it's almost always returned to her by her king or her husband or or something like that. When she atones and what would be the word for it? Gives her loyalty back to her husband, to the man, to her patriarch. He then, by his grace or by indirectly, she gains her beauty back. So this is another symbol that's in there. These things, it was just completely loaded with symbolism in here. So,
yeah.
And also I love the thing with folklore is, and this is something that I steal from folklore, right? Like the dude O'Bannon from the Alien movies. I don't steal from anybody. I steal from everybody. This is something that I steal from folklore. Folklore does this thing, not always, but sometimes, where it starts out, there's like a problem. You think it's getting better, it gets bad, and then it gets worse, and then it ties up at the end. So it's really, they don't follow this kind of modern arc of there's a beginning, and then there's an apex, and then there's a descent and a resolution. They don't follow that. It's kind of this, you think it's going one way, and then the rug gets pulled out and it goes another way, and then you think it's getting bad, but then it gets worse, and then it gets better. And I love that. You never know where it's going to go. It's truly, truly an exciting way of structuring story beats. The way that old folklore goes, it doesn't follow our modern formulas. And this is something that I try to invoke in my writing as well. And Mike, I really, really love that you called folklore and fairy tales wonder tales as well, because that is what wonder tales is what they used to call them. And then wonder tales also became the word for later weird fiction and pulp fiction and heroic fiction.
That's right. Doesn't Lovecraft mention that somewhere? He calls them wonder tales.
Absolutely. Everybody called them wonder tales.
Yeah.
He has many famous quotes where he talks about the nature of wonder tales and stuff like that. And he has a lot of really meaningful commentary about it. Folks want to go read his essays. But yeah, that was my take on Hans my Hedgehog. I thought it was wonderful. I thought it was but it wasn't my favorite one, actually. It wasn't my favorite one.
Yeah, well, it's cool that you actually picked up on the iron shoes thing, because what that is well, first of all, if you read the book, there was several books that were written for these tale types, because it basically was one guy started in the just after World War I, cataloging the types, and he wrote a book with that, and then his name is Arne, Aarne. I forget what his first name is, but there is a couple generations later, a guy by the name of Stith Thompson took up that same project of cataloging the tale types, massively expanded it, so it became the AT tale types, Arne Thompson. And then sometime in I believe the 1990s, perhaps the 2000s, very recently anyway, a guy by the name of Hans-Jörg Uther further expanded them. And so they're now called ATU tale types. And if you read Uther's, it's a 3-volume work. It's very, very thick. There are many of these tale types. So you would think that if you're going to organize them into these things that have different genres or abstract categories, then you're going to probably only end up with 10 or 20 or maybe at most something like 50 tale types, right? But that's not the way that things work in the real world. In the real world, things are very messy. So it turns out that there are these little sort of kernels of a story, these little germs of a story. There are thousands of them. And there are even more motifs. It's not just tale types. They have these little things called motifs in them, one of which are the iron shoes. So this is one of the things that will be cataloged for sure in the Uther 3-volume series. You'll get that. There's definitely that. And also another one is the throwing the skin into the fire. This is something that when I rewatched this, I was like, I've read that in a few different places, because it comes up in folk tales all over the place. The idea of like you throw the skin into the fire and it frees the guy from something. That's just a motif. It's not even a tale. It's just like a thing that happens or whatever. But this story exhibits at least two tale types that I could identify. One of them is number 361, Bearskin, where it's basically about a husband that is like kind of like ugly or uncouth or unkempt, and that usually in the tale what happens is there's actually folktales are just shot through with threes everywhere. 3 this, 3 that. It just happens all the time. Usually it's 3 princesses or like daughters, the first 2 of whom reject him and the third one like accepts him. So that's Bearskin, and that one goes back to 750 BC. So this tale kind of like, at least part of the tale goes back a very, very long way. Another tale type that you get out of this is the animal bride, which is number 402. And we know this one very much more clearly. It's more famously known as Beauty and the Beast. This one goes back to the Proto-Western Indo-Europeans. So this is very ancient indeed. It goes back to 2750 BC. So some of these, like the tale types that are sort of woven together into this story, are very, very old indeed. It's hard to say. How old is Hans the Hedgehog is a complicated question, because there's different layers to it. There's different parts of the story that kind of sit at different, time frames. So yeah, I just find that very interesting. And I love the way that folk tales are kind of woven together like that. It's a kind of, what would be the word? It's like a modular story. You can kind of like mix and match, or like, put things together in different ways and come up with different stories. It's just a completely different way of telling a tale from, anything else that we're familiar with in the modern era. So the next episode that we watched.
Real quick, I do want to bring up, and this is going to go into this one as well. Everybody knows the, I don't know what the word is, escapes me right now. The saying, third time's a charm, right? Third time's a charm. You see third time's a charm in everything, right? Charm isn't necessarily like a bit of luck. Charm is actually the Saxon word for like a spell. It's a Saxon, for example, the old Galders or the inscriptions, a lot of times were referred to as charms in the old Saxon ways. So when you say third time's a charm, you're not saying, oh, well, third time I might get lucky. No, it's like the third time, the number 3 is magic. This is this is a sacred number.
When the spell takes effect or something.
That's when the spell takes effect. That's correct. So, on the third time, the iron shoes, you're going to see the third time in this next one, there's something really important that happens. And then also, you can see it all throughout the one that comes off the top of my head, when Odin tries to sire his son Vali in order to get revenge for Baldur's death. He goes and takes 3 forms, and the third time is a charm, and the third time it works, right? This happens over and over and over again. So the soldier and death.
Yes. Okay. So the summary of the tale is there is a soldier who is like wandering, and he comes across 3 different people. So first of all, he comes across was a guy who's like fiddling or something like that. He gains like a beautiful whistle. After that, they comes across another, it's like wandering minstrel or whatever, gains I believe it's like a pipe or something. And the third time around, and each time he gives to this person like his last biscuit or whatever, and they give him this reward. And the third reward that he gets from giving the person the biscuit is he gets 2 things. He gets a deck of cards that can never lose, and he also gets a sack that if you just speak the right word, whatever you want will be trapped in the sack.
Well, the third time he gets the cards.
He definitely gets the cards at that point. I think he gets the sack at the same time, but
he does. You're right.
At some point,
first one is the dance, or the first one is his beautiful whistle. Second one is the greatest dance,
the dance,
the jolliest dance, and the third one is he gets the magic playing cards as well as the sack. Correct.
Yeah. So once again, you see that threes are everywhere. When you're reading folktales or listening to them or whatever, I want you to pay attention for threes. You will hear them over and over and over again. So he takes the sack and the cards, and he gets wind of an abandoned castle that has been infested by devils. So he goes there, and he stakes a wager with the devils that I think he wagers his soul or something like that. And they wager to give him mountains of gold, like pots and pots and pots of gold. And of course he plays with the cards that can never lose. And so he wins, even though they're cheating and everything. It's hilarious. I love this one. This one really also stuck out to me. One of the things I remembered as a kid, many years later, is just remembering the devils themselves. It's just, again, kind of uncanny and weird and funny and scary at the same time. It's amazing. So he wins the gold, and he also wins one of the devils. He takes the devil's foot because he puts them in the sack. Then he lets them out, and they say, "Okay, well, we'll give you anything you want. We'll give you the gold and whatever." And he keeps one of the devil's foot, and he's like, "Remember where it is. You have to come back and serve me. In other words, whenever I want." So. That devil at a later time, he comes back and he shows, in exchange for getting back his foot, he shows the soldier how to tell if whoever it is that he's looking at will get well or die. So if it's somebody that's laying in the bed and he's sick, the soldier will be able to tell whether he'll get well or not. And so the soldier ends up becoming this miracle doctor. He's just this itinerant wanderer who can, tell people what they need to do in order to heal, or if the person's, condemned to die or whatever. So one of the things that happens is that it turns out that the Tsar, because this is a Russian tale, the Tsar is sick, and the Tsar has treated him very, very well. So he decides what he's going to do is he's actually going to trick Death. And he doesn't trick Death. What he does is he says to Death, "Take me instead." So Death agrees. The Tsar is spared, and the soldier himself becomes gravely ill. And of course, Death is sitting at the head of the bed, which is how you know if someone's going to die. And so the soldier. He looks through the glass that tells him whether someone's going to die or not. He sees Death and he says, "What is this?" "It's a sack." "Well, then get in it." And so he traps Death in the sack. And so what happens is that no one is able to die at that point. And all these weird things happen, nobody can die. Old people just get older and older. Wars are fought and then nobody dies, and all this crazy stuff happens. And eventually he realizes that this is against the natural order. There's something wrong here. It can't go on like this. So he decides to let Death out. But of course, Death is terrified of him and his sack. And now, forevermore, the soldier is a wanderer throughout the earth. He can't die because Death won't come for him. So he can neither go to the underworld, which the devils don't want him there anyway, but nor can he make it into heaven because he can't die. So he's condemned to wander forever throughout Earth. And that's basically the end of the tale. So this one was really interesting for lots of reasons. But anyway, I want Dave's take on this before I go into anything.
So the first thing that stood out to me were the three gifts, right? Third time's a charm, right? The three gifts, first of all, number 3, and this is something that you see a lot as well. A hero shows up, and usually it's some sort of, maybe it might be a deity taking human form, testing their generosity or whatever, what's in their heart, etc. It doesn't say anything like this, but it sort of it implies that these three homeless men, these three beggars, there's something about them. They give him magic gifts. There's something about them. They're not who they seem to be, right? So he gives his biscuit to the first one, and he gives him a beautiful, he calls it the ruby whistle, a beautiful whistle that he can make with his mouth. He makes a beautiful sound. And what this said to me was, I interpreted this as past, right? One of Odin's names is Omi, he who makes the beautiful sound, is what Omi means. And it's no secret that Omi also sounds like Om, which is the primordial sound of God in Hinduism, of Brahman, right? It is also, if you think about it, in Voluspo, you have Ymir, right? Ymir is he who groans, right? The sound is very much associated with very ancient primordial things. Sound, especially beautiful sounds, things that echo, is something that is associated with reaching into the past, right? You go next. He gives a biscuit to the next beggar, which gives him the jolliest dance. I interpreted this as this is something of the present. Celebration, to dance is something to do in the moment. It is, and he gives him the jolliest one. This is the best dance. This is him to be enthralled in the happiness of the now as he dances. And then the third, he gets these playing cards, which never lose. And the playing cards in and of themselves are associated with future, right? You have tarot cards. Now we can argue about the authenticity of tarot cards, but very often cards are an analogy for things like runes or bones or whatever type of what's it called when you see into the future? Divination, right? Cards are associated with divination. Chance is associated, luck is associated with things going forward. So it was like past, present, and future, kind of given in this form of three, and then third's the charm, where he gets these cards in this sack that really are what affect the story, right? So he goes, as Mike said, and the third one was his hardest one because it was his last biscuit. And he was going to break it in half and split it with him. But he said, you know what? I'll just give you the whole thing. And he says, okay, because of that, you're going to get the greatest gift. So he gives him the sack and the playing cards, and he goes and he tricks the devils. And like you said, the devils were so hilarious. They're so weird. They're these little red devils. They're like clearly puppets. They have these funny voices, and they're like, "How is he winning? She's like, me too. I'm cheating, and I'm still not winning." Right? I just thought that was hilarious, and they were so funny. But one thing I thought was interesting was that kind of these aren't the kind of devils that you would see in Christian mythos. These are like some other type of devil. You know what I mean? And in Christian mythos, you wouldn't be able to do this with devils, right? They're so far beyond your ability and comprehension and everything like that. This idea of and I've heard Christians critique this idea that happens in folklore that you're able to trick devils. This is actually a big talking point of Protestant preachers is don't listen. And their proof of why folklore is pagan and demonic is because it tells you that you have the capacity to trick devils and demons. And like, devil went down to Georgia, get tricked by the fiddle. And he's like, don't listen to that. That you can never trick a devil, whatever. That's like their whole thing. So I found that the devils in this were pretty interesting because they can be tricked and they do get tricked. Really, and one of my favorite parts of all of these is when he tricks the devils into the sack, and then he starts beating the sack off the ground and stomping on it and sitting on it. Like they're like, he's like beating them up with he puts them in a sack and beats them against the ground and shit. That was so fun. That was like, my one son was sitting there watching. He's like falling over laughing about this. He thought it was so funny. But yeah, it was. There was that, and I think there was a few other things I thought were pretty interesting about it. I'll just let you go ahead.
Yeah. And I love all that same stuff about it too. What you raised about the devils being not quite, Christianized or whatever. Really, what they sort of seem to represent much more closely is something like mischievous land spirits, or perhaps house spirits, or the spirits of the castle itself, right? There is something later on where they like live in hell or whatever, so there is a Christianization aspect to it as well. But structurally, you're right; they don't actually really answer to what we would think of as like demonic characters or whatever. They're more like imps or like mischievous sprites and things like that, and that is something that is definitely like a heathen thing or a pagan thing or whatever.
And I thought it was a pretty strange that he would want, if you're looking at this from a Christian perspective, that he would want to go to hell.
Yeah,
right, because that's like
like how is that preferable? Because one of the things that happens, I'm not sure if I explained it, but when he can't die, he basically goes to hell and says, like, please let me in. Right. And they're like, fuck you. You're the guy with the sack. We don't want you. You know what I mean? Go away. But why? Why would he want to do that? Why would he choose to enter the underworld? It just does not make any sense from a theological perspective if it's a Christian perspective. But yeah, no, that's an important thing to recognize. Also, I wanted to sort of like riff on what you said there, Dave, about the three beggars being perhaps having some sort of supernatural element to them. I mean, of course they do, because they give him these things that are, certainly supernatural. Give him like a special whistle, give him his like dance or whatever, and giving him the sack and the cards. There's certainly a supernatural element involved there of the gifts that they give him. And I think that there's something underneath the surface here where it's a well-worn motif in folklore and mythology even, that you never know who it is that you're going to encounter. So you need to be good to strangers, right? This is something that shows up very, very strongly in Grimnismal. It's really the whole plot engine of Grimnismal is that the king doesn't know who he's receiving. It turns out he's receiving Odin, and that he suffers as a result of being a poor host. And there's also the Greek tale of Baucis and Philemon, where basically like Zeus goes door to door and like asks to be let in and taken in and as a guest. And this old couple, they basically they treat him very well, and then they're rewarded in the end and everything like that. So this is something that like actually goes well and truly across the Indo-European world. And it's entirely possible that motif kind of found its way through many twists and turns into this folk tale and elsewhere as well. So I think that's really good to pick up on. Did you have anything more to say about this folk tale, or shall we move to the last one?
No, let's move to the last one.
All right. So the last one was the Heartless Giant. And so this tale basically goes, there's a heartless giant, a giant with no heart in his body, where he gets put into prison by a king. And it turns out that he's rotting in there for years and years, and the king's youngest son, Leo, befriends him. And then the giant, who is an asshole, tricks Leo into breaking himself out. And Leo's heartbroken over this. He feels really stupid and all of that. And of course, the giant is like a terror that's like terrorizing the countryside. It's a big problem. So the king sends Leo's older brothers out, but the brothers don't come back. So Leo decides that he's the one that made the mess and he's got to clean it up. So he goes after the giant and is searching for his brothers and to fix the problem basically that he caused. And in the process, he helps. As he's traveling, he helps this bird that the giant has trampled. So he nurses it back to health. The bird says, "I won't forget you." And moving a little bit further on, does something similar for a fish that's like been beached out of the water. He throws the fish back into the water. The fish says, "Thank you, and I'll repay you at some stage." And then he continues on, and his horse dies. And he encounters this wolf who asks the boy if he will allow the wolf to eat the horse, so that he doesn't starve. And Leo says, "Yes, that's fine. You can do that." And then the wolf says, "Okay, thank you. I will take you to your destination." So he hops on the wolf's back. They travel to the giant's lair or whatever it is, and it turns out that the giant has turned his brothers to stone, and they're all standing outside there with many other people in the giant's like sort of front yard or whatever it is. He talks to the giant. The giant says, "You can stay if you sort of, do some chores around here or whatever it is." And Leo, finds out that he doesn't have a heart in his body. So he asks him, "Well, where is your heart?" And after a couple of false starts, it turns out that the giant's heart is inside an egg, which is inside a duck, which is inside a well, which is inside a church, which is inside an island, inside a lake, inside a mountain. Let's get this like weird sort of like Russian doll situation or whatever it is. So he travels to the mountain and so on and so forth, finds the church, but he can't get in because the front door is locked. There's a key for it, but he can't reach it. So the bird that he helps comes back and retrieves the key for him. He goes in. He finds his way to the duck who's like laid the egg. He grabs onto the egg, but he fumbles it and it falls into the well. He can't get down to reach it. So the fish comes back and says that, "I won't forget you. So here's the egg back." And he throws the egg back up to the boy. So Leo's got the giant's heart, basically. He goes back and he confronts the giant, says, "I have your heart." The giant says, "Please give me my heart back." And he agrees to do that. And the giant says, "I'll even turn your brothers back from stone," or whatever it is. So they do that. He turns them back. The brothers grab the egg and thus the giant's heart from Leo. And they say, "You've caused so much pain and suffering." And they crush the giant's heart. So this kills him. And he sort of deteriorates into a hill or whatever it is. And that's the end of the story. It just ends on this sour note, which is like kind of funny. So, Dave, I thought that this would be your favorite story. So tell me what you thought about it.
Yeah, I three's a charm, like all the way. He's the third brother, right? He's the third brother to go. He is the charm, right? He goes, he talks to, he gives generosity 3 times to 3 different creatures. Third time's a charm. The wolf takes him, and then they all later atone and help him in his journey. While he's in the house, the giant first tells him he keeps his heart in the cupboard, and he says, "Okay, well," and then he cleans the cupboard to say, "Well, this is where your heart is." He says, "That's not where it is. It's under the step." And he cleans the step and paints it, and he goes, "That's not where it is." He's like, "Where?" And then the third time's a charm, he tells him where his heart actually is. And he says, "It's in an egg, in a duck, in a well, in a church, in a lake, on a mountain." That's number 6. That's six items. So 3, 6, you see the numerology all throughout this tale.
Yeah.
And then, so I saw the numerology all throughout it. And I also really liked how one thing I really liked was, first of all, the giant was so cool. The way that they made him look so huge, that like old style of superimposing and green. I don't know if they use green screen. I don't know what they use.
They definitely used a green screen. It looked like it to me anyway. So. Yeah.
It was just fantastic. I love the puppets. I love the way the fish looked. I don't know why. I just thought it was very charming, like this little fish. And then the way that it dove down. I love the wolf, the talking wolf. I just thought it was fantastic. I thought I just love this era. Like you said, I love this era of production. I love the practical effects. I love the puppetry and the animatronics, and the prosthetics of the faces. I think it's beautiful. It's its own era. It's its own thing. And it's very sad that things don't look like this anymore, because it adds, that you're looking at puppets, that you're looking at animatronics, but they're real things. And it gives, I think that even though consciously that it's fake, it has more of a subconscious effect on you when the characters are interacting with real life things, as opposed to CG. Because I think that CG, when you see actors interacting with CG things, it's just like there's not even a thing there, so it doesn't even have the same effect. So for me, anyways, when we talked about Neverending Story, the Luck Dragon has a magic to him. Has people fell in love with that puppet, right? They just fell in love with it because it's a real thing. It has real fur, it's really touched, even if it is, maybe it might not look as real as CG, but it also looks realer than CG, if that makes sense. So besides the production, one thing that I really liked about this, and this is probably just something they cooked up in the show or whatever, but at the end where he's like, I promised, blah, 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 and the brother's like, no, fuck that, we're going to kill this giant. So he kills the giant. And at the end, the narrator, the storyteller says, later on, Leo becomes a great king, right? And when he becomes a great king, he has, I don't know what he says, 49 grandchildren, and he tells them all this story. But in his story, the giant gets his heart back and becomes good again. And the fact that he's like, well, that's how it really happened, but he told the story in a way that it had more of an effect, was something that I don't know why. I do know why. It's because I really love the effect of storytelling. Storytelling in and of itself is something that I think is a very special. I think it's an art. I believe that it is an art. It is a folk art that people appreciate. And what he did was he customized the story so that it would be more of a folk tale instead of something that actually happened. Because a lot of times things that actually happened don't wrap up cleanly. They don't tell a story in and of themselves, like a meta story, or they don't have a narrative. When things that actually happen, a lot of times, end up the wrong way, or you guys know what I'm saying. So I thought that was in and of itself a special little thing.
That's interesting that you picked up on that, because that's not that little tag at the end of the story is not really something that I've ever thought about, but I like that interpretation of it, actually, that it turns it into more of a folk tale kind of thing. I really, maybe it's just my weirdness and my sort of, I don't know what you call it, masochism in some ways. I kind of like stories that don't wrap up neatly. I kind of like tragedy. I like things that are real or whatever, you know what I mean? And the Soldier in Death one is definitely one of those. And I've gotten so many questions. My youngest, she'll just be like, Daddy, I want to watch The Devils. Let's watch The Devils. And we'll have to sit down. We've got to watch the whole thing. It's always good. But it's always like, why is he wandering around? Why can't he go? Why can't he go into the sky? Why can't he go underground? Why? Right? This tale raises many, many questions in a kid's mind. It raises questions in anybody's mind, right? Like the guy has to wander forever. He must be wandering still, mustn't he? Like that kind of thing. And then the Heartless Giant itself as well. Look, this is something that I really love about folklore, is that it reminds it's something that cannot be integrated into a liberal worldview very easily. It reminds progressives of things that they would rather forget. And I kind of like that in a way, you know what I mean? And it's great for kids. It's very good for kids as a result. It doesn't lie to them. It doesn't pretend like the world is something that it's not, right? It it's hard to swallow for people that have this, like, dare I say it, childish worldview. It's not even childish. It's like, it's just immature. You know what I mean? It's like children can understand this stuff, as we've been saying, right? They, that it enshrines all these things that progressives hate, right? That it enshrines black and white morality of having taboos that like actually can't be broken. You know what I mean? It has tragic endings. Sometimes life doesn't work out the way that you want it to. Sometimes things end very badly for people, and kids can handle that. But for some reason, the bug man can't. I don't know. It enshrines natural gender dynamics, right? It tells you not to trust strangers. It gives you this connection to a place. It gives you a connection to the soil, right? Especially if, you're just like, I always eagerly watched when I was looking at these, when I was watching these folktales in the first instance when I was a kid. It always says from an early Russian folktale, from an early German folktale. You know what I mean? And it's like there's something about the flavor of the different places that you pick up on that's really cool. And it tells you that people sometimes keep their word, right? Like it enshrines the idea of oath keeping, like in the in Hans my Hedgehog. There's like a wonderful line where the hedgehog asks the daughter who's betrothed to, he says, "Do you find me ugly?" And she says, "Not so ugly as going back on a promise." Right? And that's like, what a line. It's just amazing.
All three of these.
There's so many good things. Yeah.
The oath in there. You have in the Heartless Giant, the boy Kastaki, he's like completely heartbroken that he breaks his promise. And the reason I think that he changes the story is so he can paint it as this is what happens when you keep your promise.
Right.
As opposed to breaking the promise. Right. And then also, what was the other? The devils are bound by oath. Like, according to Christian mythos, a devil's not going to keep his oath. Devil's not bound by promise. Devils break promises and lie, they deceive. That's their whole thing. So it's like every single one of these has this. You must keep your oath. You must atone. You must repay. The three in the Heartless Giant, the three creatures that come back to help Leo. It's keeping promises, keeping your word, and atoning is like over and over and over again in this whole thing.
Yeah, and of course that is the traditional Germanic way of life, right? Like where keeping your oaths was just something that was taken for granted. Really, it's in the background, right? And it's one of the wonderful things about folk tales, that it's not something that is even comes into question, kind of thing, right? So it's completely illiberal, it's completely traditional, it's completely anti-modern in many ways, although in another way it's timeless, right? Because tradition basically being something that kind of stands outside of time, that is as true today as it was back, when this folktale was originally told, like 2200 BC or whatever it is. It's kind of stands outside of time, right? So the folklore itself is sort of proof against liberalism in so many ways, right? Number one, that we're not just these abstract individuals that are like making voluntary decisions independent of time or place or culture or what have you. It's like you are fully bounded by your culture, by your folk, by your people, by your customs and everything, by our folk traditions. Basically, we really just are our stories, and this is one of the things that really comes through when you read these things. And this is why I think the Folktales book that we put out struck such a chord. I had no idea. Like, I knew it was going to do well, because when we first started Imperium Press, the initial, what I had for the website is that we'd have all the releases that were out, but we also had like a coming soon section, right? One of the things I put in there was the Folktales book, and people were like, "What's this weird Folktales thing? When is that coming out?" I would just get these questions, like clamoring for it, just like people asking over and over, "When's the Folktales book coming out?" So I actually took it down for a few months, but while we were prepping for it, because I just got tired of answering questions about it, and then it dropped, and it became far and away our bestseller. Like, it was just
wow.
Not until the Populist Delusion did anything like remotely outshine it. And I guess in the end, Ancient City has done very well too. But that was definitely, at the time, that was like the big one for us. And very interestingly, it did very well. It did well everywhere, but it did especially well in countries like in Europe. It did really, really well in England. It did very well in Germany. It did very well in the Scandinavian countries. And it's very hard for me to... I've done a lot of thinking about this, why that might be. I think that, and this is actually something that was pointed out to me by... I went on a podcast called Hearth of Europa, which is unfortunately defunct now. It was such a good podcast. And I posed this question to them. And one of the ladies there gave me what I think is probably the right answer. I think what it is that people in America, especially, are able to really, like, their folk traditions are very close to them because Americans, they have a national mythos, and you're allowed to kind of be patriotic in America. Not really anymore, but like certainly a generation ago, you were pretty well allowed to be patriotic American. It's been many generations since Canadians or Englishmen or Germans especially were allowed to be patriotic and proud to be where they're from. It's been a long time since these countries were able to have national pride. What folklore kind of does is it gives you, it's going to kind of trivialize it a little bit, but it gives you a safe way of being about where you're from. You know what I mean? In a way that it doesn't trip any radars, whatever. It's a very, very deep and abiding need that we all have. And when you take that away, it kind of comes out in these different ways. So I think that's probably a big part of it, actually. But it did very well, and it struck a nerve that I had no idea how good it was going to do. So it was really gratifying. But in a way, it's also kind of not surprising, right? There's so many things in folklore that it's doing for us. That is, if I was to call it nationalistic, that would be kind of selling it a little bit short, right? It's nationalism, as deep and abiding as it is it's kind of a convolution on top of this, like, deeper folkishness is really what it is. I mean, folkishness is kind of the wellspring of nationalism. Nationalism is an expression of folkishness, and of course, folklore is an even deeper expression of that very same thing, right? And it gives you a connection to the soil. Like, one of the themes that we keep coming back to here on Culture Dads is localism, right? Everything that's great, everything that matters is particular to a place and to a people, right? This is what we talk about when we talk about the Tyrrhic, for example. The Tyrrhic is always obsessed with boundaries. The paradigm of the Tyrrhic and the Odinic Tyrrhic paradigm is the ancestor cult, and the ancestor cult is obsessed with boundaries. It's about drawing a line around the family and making everything else kind of irrelevant. It's about keeping the literal boundaries of the the family farm, and like there's it's in the ancient city where it's just basically it's like, here's the terminus, here's the boundary stone, and if you touch the boundary stone, there's all these punishments and things like that. It wants to keep things separate, basically. It's obsessed with what's from here, what's inside, what's close, right? And the beauty of folklore is that it gives you a real sense of local flavor. Like when you read the same tale type, whether it's Cinderella or Beauty and the Beast or whatever it is, even though these things, all these different stories that answer to these types, they share some pretty important features. It's the specifically French or German or Spanish or Tyrolean or Latvian flavor, or whatever it is, that comes across in them. And that's beautiful and wonderful. I love that. I've always loved this about different countries in the world. To be a nationalist or to be a somebody who just like loves where they're from does not mean having to hate other people. You can see that and love it and think that that's beautiful. So this ideal for folkishness or nationalism or whatever, it makes sense that folklore studies was really born during the Romantic nationalist period. Like, English folktales helped the English to connect to the English soil. Russian folktales helped the Russians to connect to their country and where they're from and everything like that. And it's especially great for people whose traditions are relatively recent. It's really great for people like, Canadians or Australians or Americans or people from New Zealand and so on. It really helps us to connect to the old world in a way that's very deep. And by extension, to connect to our most ancient roots with our Proto-Indo-European roots. Because most of these folktales do actually go back thousands and thousands of years. So it makes sense that there's this big crossover between folktale enjoyers and heathens, right? I don't know how anybody could miss it. There's such a clear flavor of the archaic and the magical in folktales. So this is a way for us, in the new world to connect to our deep roots. But there's definitely a connection to the soil aspect of it that's just beautiful. I love it. I just, it'll never get old. It'll never get old discovering these folktales.
And we have them. People that think that us in the new world, Paul Bunyan. Paul Bunyan. Actually, speaking of, I have a friend of mine. He's not in our spheres at all, but he hit me up recently because he's been getting interested in heathenry and stuff like that. He's like, "Yeah, what do you think about Paul Bunyan?" I think Paul Bunyan is, because I told him to buy a copy of the Imperium Press Folktales book, and he was just completely blown away by the foreword that you wrote, Mike. And he's like, "Yo, what about Paul Bunyan?" He brought it up to me. So we started doing like a back and forth, looking at like a critical analysis of Paul Bunyan. And there's so many tales of Paul Bunyan that have these tale types.
Yeah.
And then he starts going in and looking at this American folklore. And I think that there needs to be somebody out there should do an effort digging into American folklore and see how much of it is like authentic and part of the tradition. Because I think there's probably quite a bit that's far more ancient than just like, a couple centuries ago when we landed here. You know what I mean?
There absolutely is. And in fact, I remember when I was doing the research for this book that I came across a fair number of like American stories, like stories that were just like native to the New World that like had these tale types and everything like that. It's amazing how these things can just spontaneously arise kind of in the modern world, right? And this is part of the composite nature of storytelling, right? These folklore is basically these kind of composites of existing material. And this is exactly how scholars believe that Homer was composed as well. It may be a little bit disenchanting to say that, but the fact is that it is believed that Homer was not a single poet. Perhaps Homer was a single poet that stitched together a huge amount of traditional material. It certainly wasn't something that was originally composed by this person.
I think that's better.
It's way better. I think it makes it like even deeper and more profound, I think, right? But this is how through analysis of different things, like the kennings, to use a slightly different word, of like how they call like Achilles swift-footed, or Odysseus the man of many turns, or whatever. They would use these epithets and in ways that suggest that the poem was basically composed orally over many, many centuries. There's lots of other evidence, but that's the one that's like often pointed to. So Homer is believed to be a composite of traditional material, basically. And this is what you get in folklore as well. I mean, I've got another book. Basically, I have the Folktales book was kind of modeled after this one that I bought many, many years ago. I think it's called Folktales of the World. Anyway, and it does something kind of similar, but it's takes tales from Japan and Micronesia and South America and everywhere, basically. And you can see these tale types crop up in that book as well, right? Like in different stories that are kind of like cut and paste into like different like sections, like different narratives and everything. So clearly these were like the kind of things that could move around. And this stuff, it has a way of just kind of like arising spontaneously, even in the modern world. I was actually kind of blown away. Recently, I went to a Halloween party at a writers club that I used to go to. And it's been years since I've gone to this writers club. So I went there, and it was being held at like this one guy's house. And one of the things that we did was everybody told a spooky story because it was Halloween, of course, right? And one of the guys told this story, and he prefaced it by saying, look, this was told to me by this guy that I knew. And this is not the kind of person to make shit up. It was very, very strange to hear it coming from him. And then he told this big, elaborate story with all kinds of detail. And it was very spooky, and he told it really well. And at the end of it, everybody sort of like you could tell that like a shudder went up everybody's spine, and it was just like, whoa, that is something supernatural happened there. That is very spooky and weird. And then one of the girls piped up, and she's like, I don't want to burst anybody's bubble, but I've heard this story before. It's an urban legend.
Oh, keep that to yourself, lady.
But you know what though? What was really cool about that is just the fact that here it was in the modern world, an urban legend that is being passed along the same way that like a fairy tale, a fiery tale would be told around the fire thousands of years ago, taken seriously, believed to actually have happened. It's the same thing that has happened for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Now, this wasn't the point that she was making, but this is what I took from it, is that these kind of things, urban legends and spooky stories and things like that, they can still arise in exactly the same way, right? It's these sort of these little bits and pieces, these little kernels of a story that just get passed around and don't really change. And for some reason, they're very well conserved as in the telling, even as they're transmitted like telephone, they just don't change for some reason. I just thought it was really cool. I was like, holy shit, this is like another folk tale that hundreds or thousands of years from now, that will be like a tale type for them, or you know what I mean? Oh, yeah. So I just thought that was really cool. So these things are still with us, right? We still tell these stories, and I just, I thought that was amazing. I was like, cool, this is like folk culture being created like right here. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, man, I love telling stories. I think telling stories is, like I said before, it's an art, and it is such a fun thing. And a lot of stories, like you mentioned, even if it is an urban, I think we put too much emphasis on whether or not it actually fucking happened. Who cares like who said it or where it came from or whatever, as long as the story is good. Yeah, right. That's there all the time. I've heard guys, friends that are good story, tell a story, and at the end they're like, I don't know. I heard that from somewhere. That's not me. Like they told the story in first person, like it's happening to them, and they're like, I don't know. That wasn't me. I got that from somebody else. And it didn't matter. It doesn't matter because they told the story, and while you're listening to the story, it sounds awesome. And I think that the story in and of itself is more important than whether or not that person is literally an eyewitness to it happening. I think trying to force that criteria onto a story ruins it a little bit. I really enjoy tales, like people telling stories where you don't even like really know the origins of the story and stuff like that. And growing up, I was just captivated by this shit. I grew up in an area that had a lot of like folklore, right? A lot of little monsters and ghosts and haunted places and haunted fields and the Blue-Eyed Six and old abandoned churches that had like spooky stuff. I just loved it. I loved it. There's an abandoned insane asylum that they said there was a gate to hell. So we would all like in the middle of the night go drive our cars, try to get past the gates, and it was like it's so much fun. It's so much fun. And on top of that, not just spooky stories, but funny stories too of people's antics, right? I've heard so many good stories of people going on adventures and doing weird stuff or having fun or funny things or gross, raunchy things. Still, it doesn't matter. A good story is a good story, and I think that it is an art and a very special thing. And it's something my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, was a fantastic storyteller. This guy, and he was old Italian guy, and I don't know if you guys know this. Old Italians love to scare the shit out of little kids. It's like one of my favorite things is to tell them horrible, scary, spooky stories before bed and give them nightmares and play pranks on them and just terrorize kids. They just love it, right? That was like my pop-pop's favorite shit was to terrorize me. And, I had a neighbor. His name was Nick, and he was an old guy, fought in World War II. Really, a really, really nice man, but, a really hardworking man. But this guy loved telling stories. And he told me about, there was goblins in the woods and imps, and told me about werewolves and all kind of stuff. Most of them, I think he just made them up. A lot of them, I think he got from his grandfather or his father or somebody else. And he just loved it. He loved telling stories. And it was like me and his grandson or whatever, like we would just go and like sit and he would just tell us stories. And I just fell in love with that. And another guy, some of you folks might be familiar with him, Mr. Stephen McNallen, said something one time. I used to produce, he had a show called God's Folk and Destiny that I produced for him some years back. And unfortunately now me and Mr. McNallen, I still have love for him. And me and him, I guess we're still kind of friends. I am not friendly with his former organization. The AFA is not friendly with me, and I'm not cool. We're not going to get into all that. But Mr. McNallen said something one time, actually quite a few times, that I just took to heart, and I loved it. And he said that something along the lines of, he who wins life is he who ends up with the best stories. And because everybody knows Mr. McNallen is a tremendous storyteller himself. He has so many stories about traveling the world and little adventures and the interesting, weird people that he's met in his travels and all the stuff. And I took that to heart. So it's just like I've had a lot of elders that I've interacted with or known throughout my life that really put an emphasis on storytelling and entertaining and doing these things. So I've always loved telling stories myself. I guess I am kind of known as a storyteller guy and always have been, even when I was younger, because I love doing it. I think there's something, I don't even know what to say about it. I just intuitively know that it's a special thing. It's a gift that I was given. And I also think that there are guys out there that are given that have the gift of storytelling, and because of that, weird shit happens to them. So they get like really bizarre, crazy things happen to them so they can go on to tell the story. Yeah. And that has just always been my thing. I remember being a teenager and my buddies would be like, yo, there'd be somebody new that comes to the group or whatever. Yo, Dave, tell this story, tell that story, blah, blah, blah. And they would light the lantern and put it by me so I could tell the story because I get real animated with it and I do voices and I really, really get into it. I love it. I just love it. And I have stories that my friends and kinsmen have heard probably hundreds of times and they still ask me to tell them, tell the story when new people come around. And I don't know. I just love it. I think it's a tremendous, wonderful pastime. Whether, like I said, whether it be something spooky and scary, whether it be something adventurous, whether it be something ancient or something raunchy and gross, like a guy story with your escapades as a young man and something really funny and embarrassing happens. You know, these things, I don't know. I just think storytelling is a special thing. And I think people that are gifted with storytelling are obligated to tell stories because I don't know. I just think that they're special. And even if you hear a good story, if you hear a great story and you have the ability to retell it in a special way, it doesn't matter if you saw it, if you were there or whatever, tell that story because it's a wonderful pastime. It's fun. It entertains. And it's probably the type of performance that you don't really need to go to school for or get trained in. You don't need to do any sort of work. You just need to be able to recite it with passion and it's a performance, right? It's a performing art of the most common variety. And I think that there should be more of it.
Yeah, and it is something very special. It's and we've got some good storytellers in our scene, in our thing, in our spheres. Stephen McNallen is definitely one of them. He's a great storyteller. But you know, Big Dave, we've got him on this podcast. He's one of the best. He's one of the best storytellers in our thing here. I'm just along for the ride, dude. I'm not the storyteller that Dave is. So that's that's not my strength, but it's definitely something I think guys come to Culture Dads for and like to listen to. So, and folktales themselves are very valuable in that way. And someone who can really spin a good yarn and retell a folktale in a compelling way is got quite a gift and is obligated to share it with the world, because what folktales do is they do something very important. They re-enchant the world, I think, by restoring us to a state of mystery, right? And this is very important. They sort of place us into a mythical mode of thought where it's not really characters that are undertaking these deeds or in the stories. There's never any real, characterization or internal monologue. And there's usually very minimal, even just like setting and description and things like that in the folktale. It's basically archetypes that are kind of, doing battle or undertaking their deeds and things like that. And very often the folktale doesn't quite make logical sense. It makes pre-logical sense. The action doesn't quite follow cause and effect. It follows the needs of a good story, right? And this kind of pushes us back to something that is, again, pre-rational, right? It restores us to a state of mystery, and especially something spooky, right? There's something spooky in many, many folktales. There's ones that are just heartwarming and touching and everything, but the ones I really love are the kind of like the uncanny ones, the weird ones. I think this is why I love Russian folktales so much, right?
Yeah.
And I agree with what you said there, Dave, about how it's how about your grandfather scaring the shit out of little kids. He's a man after my own heart. I love that too. I just love scaring my kids with like weird stories, and spooky stuff, and like things in the woods and like monsters and giants and things. One of the things that I always say to my youngest, because she's in that mode right now where she's trying to figure out the world. She's trying to figure out like what is really actually going on out there. We'll go out. One of the things we do every night is like one of our little traditions that we do, our little rituals, is we'll go out and we'll just look at the stars. It's something that she started. And now we do it every night. And when we go out there, we'll look up and she yells. She'll let out this little yelp, and then be like, "Dad, we have to go inside. The giants are coming." I'm like, "There's giants in this world, honey." Right? and she gets really freaked out about it. She'll like tear her little ass off, like just run in the house, you know what I mean? Because she's like genuinely afraid that there's giants out there, right? And this is one of the things that like folktales do for us. There's a famous quote, right, by G.K. Chesterton, that fairy tales don't tell children that dragons exist. Kids already know that there are dragons out there. They know that there are giants in this world. Fairy tales tell kids that giants can be beaten, right? That's what the fairy tale is there to do. It's there to impart a lesson. And there's some very important lessons that it imparts that even go beyond that, of being brave and everything. It cultivates a kind of love of home. And this is, I think, my overall take on folklore and why it's important, especially why it's important to us and what we're doing, is this is how you make people love their country, love where they're from. You re-enchant the land where they live, right? You tell them about the giants that live on the other side of the forest, on the other side of the bushland, over there. You tell them about the spirits that live maybe, behind the fireplace in their house. You fill the place that they live with wonder. If you make it special and unique, then they really will feel that there's no place like home, right? So, I mean, like all of the ideological stuff, all of the everything, that's important too, but it all sort of falls away in the face of just the love of home. As simple as that, right? Folklore does that. And especially if you make it a part of your daily routine with your kids and everything, if you make it special, it can become some of the most special family time, as Dave said earlier about reading to his kids and getting into it and making it dramatic and everything. Like when you're telling your kids stories, you can kind of rush through it at the end of the night. Some people don't tell their kids any stories. They don't read them at all. But, you could rush through it or whatever, or you could make it a real event. You could make it a little ritual, right? You could be like, okay, it's 7:00 or whatever it is. It's time for a story. And then everything stops. Everybody in the family sort of like takes up their places on the couch. They're where they're supposed to sit. And then the lights kind of get dimmed a little bit. And then dad sits down and he starts into the tale, right? If you make it a performance, it's something that your kids will never forget. My kids love folk tales. They also love shit like, cartoons. They want me to read like Peppa the Pig stuff. They want me to read whatever Frozen things and stuff like that. And we do that too. But they always come back to the folk tales. Always, always, always. It was something that they will just never tire of, right? And then they will look back as adults and they won't know exactly why, but they kind of will feel it in the base of their spine when they hear some or see some like little snippet of folk culture. They'll kind of feel something, right? It may not even come out in words. They may not even understand it in words, but they'll still feel connected to their folk. And they will feel a visceral revulsion towards anybody who shits on that, who shits on their folk or anything. Because, I mean, believe me, a change is coming. It will happen. Things are moving in the ether, that what we are all about is coming to fruition. It may not happen in our lives, or maybe it will. You don't know. And we talked about this in the last episode, which is that what's at the bottom of what motivates us, I think, in many ways, is the wolf's rage at seeing what we love, our home, everything close to us, shit all over, our patrimony. And the love of home is kind of what motivates that at the end of the day. So if you can cultivate that in your children, it's not like folklore is the answer to all of our problems, but it's definitely one of those things that must be there, I think, in some way, to make your kids into people who will defend themselves, defend their home, where they're from. You have to make them love it. And folklore is one of the best ways to do that because it's one of the most ancient to us.
Yeah, I think it's folly to try to figure out solutions to all our problems. I don't think we even are able to identify all of our problems. I think we should just fall in love with the things that we know are good and true and old, and just protect and breathe life into those things. And I think if we do that, then good stuff will happen. It's like the guy, the soldier and death, right? The soldier, I can't remember what it was called, from The Storyteller.
Yeah.
He didn't know he was going to get a whistle, but he shared his biscuit with the beggar. He didn't know he was going to get that bag and the unbeatable cards and the jolliest dance. He just knew it was a good thing to give those beggars biscuits, right? So we don't know how to solve these problems. Like we can. It's obviously worthwhile to try to figure them out, and we shouldn't ignore them and pretend they're not there or anything even like close to that. But our main goal should be falling in love with what is good, and protecting and preserving, and not just preserving and putting it behind glass in a museum, but breathing life into it and living it and being it, right? And I'm all about this. I'm all about it. Storytelling is such a wonderful part of that. I think you should be able to recite and breathe life into myth, into folklore, into all of the ancient stuff, to have your own stories, to have all of it. Telling stories and in performing these things is something that anybody can do. Anybody can do. And, speaking of telling stories, talking about all that, I do get asked a lot, not a lot, but I get asked pretty frequently, how do I tell stories? How do I tell stories like you do? And I guess if I boiled it down, you have to understand that you're not trying to convince your listeners, your audience, of evidence. You're putting on a performance to entertain. And I'm not saying necessarily get up and do a dance or put on a costume or whatever, but try to put yourself in the story as you tell it. As you tell the story, visualize the story and describe it as you go. When it comes to stories that are more contemporary, say when like you went to a party and something weird happened or something crazy happened or something, whatever it is, it's okay to. I think when you use the word embellish, people think that you're just making things up. But when I say embellish, I mean add emphasis on the most interesting details. Say like XYZ happens. Word it in such a way that it sounds interesting. Or maybe in a conversation you have in the story, a lot of times people don't speak cleanly. We have ticks, we have uhs, we have ums. Sometimes we say the first part last and last part first. Don't be afraid to reorder the way that somebody said something so it has brevity and it has a little bit more oomph. Because what's important is not recounting word for word exactly how the person said it. Is the important part is conveying the gist behind the intent behind what they were trying to say. So rewrite the dialogue in your story, so that it number one, so it doesn't waste time. You got to remember every word that comes out of your mouth it needs to count. The pace of the story matters. The use of your voice. A lot of people don't. How can I say this without sounding like a jerk? A lot of people, they talk from the throat, and they don't use their voice in the way that it should be used. A lot of it is because there's, I guess it's a lot of Western culture. It comes off pretentious to be loud, or it comes off, I guess, belligerent to be loud or to project or whatever. And this is true. I am somebody that I speak from the belly all the time. I'm a loud guy. When I talk, I can't whisper. I'm just a loud guy. When I laugh, people down the street can hear me. I've always been like that. But I think that, and I do this a lot with people, and sometimes, like, I'm talking to younger guys, I'm like, dude, talk from your belly, speak, don't like put your head down and talk from your throat. Talk from your belly, brother. Say it with your chest. Whatever you're saying, especially the important things, say it with your chest. Give strength to that. Give breath. Give air. You're actually speaking when you could feel your diaphragm, your stomach push in when you speak, and that gives authority to how you talk. That gives authority and weight to your words. No matter what you're saying, people will listen. If they can hear you bouncing off the walls, they hear the sound of your voice bouncing off the walls, echoing in the room, resonating, especially if you're somebody that has a bassy, deep voice, that's something that really helps, because they can feel when you project, when you speak, not only do they hear you, they can feel the vibration of your voice. That's why, like radio guys, the best radio guys, they have these deep voices and they talk, some of the singers that sing like the best songs, right? I love power metal, guys with soaring high voices. But what are the songs that like people really, really love, that fall in love with? Christmas songs, of the guys from the old times that have the real deep voices, chestnuts roasting on an open fire, like that shit, right? That is because he's got deepness to his. Not everybody has a deep voice, and that's okay. And I'm not saying that people who don't have a deep voice are like little bitches or anything like that. But if you do have that, use that in your storytelling. Use that in your daily speech. Be very cognizant of the inflections that you use. There are certain cultures that the way that they speak in common parlance they don't really have authority, and it doesn't really translate to storytelling. When you are the storyteller, you are the king right now. You are the commander. You are commanding everybody's attention. You are the point of authority that everybody is giving attention to. They're gifting you with their attention, right? So you have to speak this kind of way. In certain Anglospheres, like Australians are really notorious for this. They kind of have this like upward inflection at the end of when they speak, and it comes off soft. And what it is because, and it's not saying that Australians are soft, but what it is that in their culture, they're very gentle communicators, and they're very they have a lot of etiquette and stuff with how they talk. So they inflect at the end of what they're saying, and it almost sounds like a question. And a lot of times Americans will be like, did he just ask? They actually think they're asking a question. But when you're asking a question, you sound unsure. You're not making a statement, right? Like I said there, a statement that sounds strong. So be cognizant of that and use inflections and flow and ups and downs in your storytelling to give different feels and different feelings to it. So when you're saying something that's strong or powerful or something that's like spooky or weird, you want to do that. Like I said, weird, that gives like a up down with a down at the end. But then you inflect upwards when you're trying to lead them somewhere and give them somewhere that has mystery. Upward inflection at the end adds mystery. And these are the kinds of things that you can think. I consciously think about these things. I've just listened to thousands of hours of narration and audiobooks and oral performances and music, and I've just kind of adopted them. But if you're somebody that wants to improve your ability to tell stories and to speak, think about these things and put them into practice. And a lot of people, they don't realize guys that are vocal talents, guys that are good speakers or orators or storytellers or impressionists, they do impressions of people. Like I do a Macho Man Randy Savage impression, right? that's not something that I just cropped up. I practiced that 1,000 times in the shower every day until I got it down. You know what I mean? When I tell a story, I've told my really good stories that I tell. I've told them 1,000 times, and before I told them to anybody else, I told them to myself 1,000 times. And I literally have a formula, and I memorize it. You got to have a lot of archives in your brain. You got to have somebody that's you got to have a big bank, right, to store these things. And sometimes the most mundane stories say something, right? Like, for example, at the beginning of this podcast, I told the story of the special guy, Oliver, that I worked with. Most people wouldn't even remember that they worked with a guy like that. And that would just kind of like be ephemeral in their mind. I have the long-term memory of an elephant. So I remembered Oliver. I remember what he looks like. I remember what he sounded like. I remembered my interactions with him. And that's not really that important of a story. That's a pretty mundane thing, but I put that in the archives, and that was sort of a meaningful introduction. So I got
it adds color, right? Like
it adds color.
These are the things that add color to our lives, right?
Yeah, everything is a performance. Even when you're not trying to tell a story, even if it's something practical, to view yourself as a performer in the world. And all of these things is I think it will help people to have that, to view speech and oration and storytelling not as just like a utility thing, but as an art. And you don't tell stories to like puff yourself up. You don't tell stories to convey or convince or whatever. Your sole job as a storyteller is to entertain and to captivate and give wonder and weirdness and beauty and spookiness and all of these kinds of things, to give that gift of imagination and wonder and fun and entertainment, right? American Krogan had a pretty good post sort of recently talking about the word entertain, right? The word entertain is about an exchange. You know what I mean? You're giving this gift of entertainment. It also means it really means to hold within. You're giving that which you hold within, this imagination, this visualization, this journey, this adventure, to somebody. You're transferring it from your mind to theirs. And the quality of it depends on your skill of the pen and your skill of the tongue. And if you have these things down, you can really be a hit at parties and be a good host, which Odin says is a good thing, and to be an interesting person. There's a lot of, I think a lot of times, young people, they don't understand how important of a quest it is to just be an interesting person. How interesting are you? Can you sit down with a stranger and they're like, wow, that was an interesting. And they walk away thinking like, yeah, I met this guy one time. He told me this thing. That's what you want. You should be an interesting person.
Yeah. And you never know until you try, right? Like, if you have a talent for it. One of the oldest stories about storytelling itself is the story of Aesop, who was a slave that, was tongue-tied, and at some stage he was given a gift by one of the gods or whatever, that just completely untied him and just made him into this master storyteller that we still know thousands and thousands of years later. And there are other examples that could be given of great orators in the modern era that discovered their talent for speaking kind of later in life, in their 30s and 40s and things like that. So worth a try anyway. It's certainly, if it's going to add more color to our lives, that's not a bad thing. So yeah, I guess in summary, I would say, guys, watch The Storyteller. The actual narrator, John Hurt, is a master, just a master. And it's very well written. These are some of the most ancient stories that we have. They're wonderful. You're going to love it. And Dave, you should watch the rest of it with your kids. They're going to love the rest of it too.
No, I absolutely will. And also, Mike sells himself short as an orator. He thinks he sucks, but he doesn't. He does. Like, he's probably like the best when he talks about these, like, giant galaxy brain word salad ideas, and the way that he describes them makes it like really easy to learn for grug brains like me. So he's a gifted orator in his own right, and he sells himself short.
We're doing different things, I guess. So yeah.
So anyway, we're over 2 hours. We're two and a quarter. So let's shut her down. Yeah, like Mike said, guys, go watch The Storyteller. What a fantastic old timey. I guess it's not that old timey. It's from the 80s. I believe it came out in 1988 or something like that. 88. When did it come out?
Yeah, I think it was like 87, 88 is when it aired.
Yeah, released 1987. So yeah, guys, this thing rules. It is old school. It's got animatronics and puppets and all of this kind of stuff, and it's weird and wonderful. It's Jim Henson at his best. So guys, go watch it. Go watch it with your kids. I guarantee you're gonna love it. It's wonderful. So go watch The Storyteller. Go read your folk tales. Be the storyteller. Be the storyteller. And that's going to be it for this episode of Culture Dads. Guys, if you're not signed up already, please go over to imperiumpress.org/podcast or culturedads.com and go get signed up to the Gumroad so you could get access to all the different tiers that offer perks like hardback copies of the Western Canon series and beyond. Awesome books that you can have and that have hardback foreverness. So go get yourself a copy. And this helps keep the lights on here at Imperium Press and with Culture Dads. And all you guys notice, we got that YouTube popping. So go over there, give a sub, give us a share, give us a like, all that good stuff. Help us spread throughout the hemisphere and bring Culture Dads to unknowing Culture Dads that might enjoy this broadcast. So check it out there. Shout out to our big dog patrons, Kazilkum Cruiser and Marvin from AFD. Man, hails and blessings to you guys, man. Because of your generosity, we can keep the lights on, and hails and blessings to all the other Culture Dads that support us and fund this operation and put coins in the coffers for our war efforts. So love and blessings. We love you guys. We appreciate you guys. And we'll see you guys next time here on Culture Dads, Age of Sword and Cassette.